Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I want to thank Faiyaz and his wife for making this event possible. Faiyaz is a long-term supporter of the University of Texas and the School of Public Health. He's professor and executive in residence in environmental and occupational health sciences at the School of Public Health. His leadership and generosity have helped create this lecture series that will produce and promote important discourse around public health issues for years to come, and also to help us highlight Houston, Texas, and the University of Texas Houston School of Public Health as a leader in environmental occupational health sciences. Through this Visiting Scholars Initiative, Drs. Mariam and Faiyaz Bhojani have created a really significant opportunity for our community. But I'd also like to note that this is not the first time that Dr. Bhojani has contributed to and leveraged philanthropy in the School of Public Health. In 2013, Faiyaz was instrumental in securing a gift from Shell for the creation of the Marcus Key Shell Occupational and Environmental Health Endowed Chair. Shell has also been a longtime committed partner to UT Health Houston. The endowment the Bhojanis have created with support from Shell will fund 1 to 3 short-term scholar stays in perpetuity. So we have many years of stimulating conversations to come. Faiyaz, we greatly appreciate your everything you do for our school, our university, and our communities to advance health across the state and the nation. And speaking of our school, we are eagerly awaiting the completion of the new School of Public Health building. This building is located in the Texas Medical Center Helix Park, a center of innovation and discovery where our experts will collaborate with other institutions and companies to find solutions to public health challenges. The 350,000 square foot, 10-story facility will house state-of-the-art research laboratories, distance learning technology, and collaborative spaces. It's scheduled to open in time for the fall semester of 2026, and we can't wait. And before I introduce our keynote speaker today, I would like to recognize our special guests from the Houston Fire Department. Thank you for joining us today and for all of the dangerous and difficult work you do every day to help keep us safe. Thank you for joining us. Now, there you go. Thank you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Alberto Caban-Martinez. Dr. Caban-Martinez is an internationally recognized authority in environmental and occupational epidemiology. He's a board-certified physician scientist, tenured professor of public health sciences, deputy director of the MD-MPH Program, and associate vice-provost for research integrity, regulatory affairs, and assessment at the University of Miami. He serves as the Deputy Director of the Firefighter Cancer Initiative at the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, with a focus on underrepresented firefighter subgroups, such as arson investigators, firefighter trainers, instructors, wildland-urban interface, and volunteer firefighters. He's a former fellow of the National Academies of Sciences Gulf Research Program, and served on the Institute of Medicine's Committee on Gulf War and Health for 2 years and provided scientific expertise in occupational exposures and work-related health conditions. His research work with first responders and construction workers led him to serve on the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health Board of Scientific Counselors and the National Occupational Research Agenda, setting the National Research Agenda on worker health and safety. He has over 200 peer-reviewed publications, presented over 298, maybe 299, scientific presentations on a wide variety of occupational health and safety topics. His presentation today will provide insights into findings from the National Firefighter Cancer Initiative. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Alberto Caban-Martinez. This moves forward, back, and this.
Laser pointer. Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Excellent. So a warm welcome from Miami and the University of Miami. Go Canes. So what I wanted to share with you this afternoon is about our program of research on cancer in the fire service. And the work that I'm going to present to you this afternoon, I actually stand on the shoulders of many scientists and clinicians who have helped build this over the last 10 years. First and foremost, this work is driven by and informed by our firefighters. So I thank Houston Fire and the local for being with us today. It is your passion for health and safety of firefighters that fuels the work that I'm going to be showing you. I want to thank the planning committee. The hospitality here has been amazing and wonderful. Dr. Falknor, Dr. Delclos, Dr. Bhojani, I am incredibly thankful for this opportunity to come share the work that we do at the university, at the state, and at the national level. And for just the really wonderful hospitality. It's been wonderful to be here, even though it's only been 24 hours and it's been fast. I think there's really great opportunity to come back. The work that I'm presenting to you today, there's many different projects, and they've been funded by different funding agencies. So the first is the state of Florida, which highlights the importance about working with your state House and Senate about securing fundings to help for, first responders. I'm also incredibly thankful to the NCI for their program grant to our NCI designated cancer center. That program grant fuels and spins a lot of research that we can do for our firefighters through the NIH. Through the National Institutes for Occupational Safety and Health, they gave us our first symposium grant, a grant to be able to launch the actual International Firefighter Symposium that we do in Miami, and then also to FEMA. FEMA has been a wonderful and incredible partner, and I know my colleague is here somewhere, Dr. Day, who helps us address the different subgroups of the fire service that ultimately may not, get the same amount of attention as structural firefighting. So how did this National Firefighter Cancer Initiative begin? How did it start? Well, the story begins when the local firefighters in South Florida came to us with their health insurance claims data. And I had just started as an assistant professor, very green, working in construction industry and injury prevention, when our leadership from the Cancer Center said, hey, the local county fire department is curious about whether their claims data is showing an increased risk for cancer. So we took that to heart, took the data, and just because we have the cancer registry in the state of Florida, we were able to compare cancer incidence data of the firefighters in the state of Florida using their certification records against their claims data. And we did see that there were certain types of cancers that were slightly more elevated within that firefighters compared to the state of Florida. And so we paired up with then our state representative, Jeanette Nunez, who's now the lieutenant governor, and put in legislation to kick off the Firefighter Cancer Initiative with the goal of addressing, is there an excess burden of cancer within the fire service compared to the general population? And so you see the emblems of the firefighter partners that helped us start this initiative. And it included the firefighters attacking the cancer epidemic, the FACE team, right? A concerted group of firefighters inside both union and leadership that wanted to have this addressed, and included the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative and nationally the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. Together with the support of these individual groups and fire services, we were able to launch back in 2014 the National Firefighter Cancer Initiative. So the initiative actually sits inside the Cancer Center. Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center is an NCI designated cancer center. So we're able to leverage the power of our oncologists to inform a lot of the science and clinical projects that we're doing through there. So is this a US issue, or is this broader to the entire international firefighter workforce? So the World Health Organization has a sub-agency called IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. IARC, among its functions, has one program called the Monograph Program. And the job of the Monograph Program is every year to produce 3 monographs on a topic that's nominated by the world population. So countries around the world say, hey, we're really interested in understanding, does Splenda cause cancer? Does formaldehyde, does benzene cause cancer? Does Roundup cause cancer? So back in 1998, the first monograph describing firefighters was published. And it was in the same title portrait where they also included shift work, and they also included painters, right? Looking at what occupational and exposures are in the work environment that may be causing that risk. So fast forward to 2021, firefighters were renominated again for an evaluation by the Monograph Program. And I was fortunate to be selected and be a member of the working group that evaluated all the literature that's published on firefighters and cancer around the world. And we spent those 2 years, 2 weeks, which they locked us up in a hotel lobby, and we couldn't come out just to discuss the articles in person with all the scientists, reevaluated all the literature, and were able to change the classification for cancer. So the IARC monograph, if you look up here on the left-hand side, there's 4 categories whether or not a substance is carcinogenic to humans. So if you label something a group 1 carcinogen, that means it's high risk probability of development of cancer there. 2A is possible, 2B is, 2A is probable, 2B is possible, and a group 3 classification means there's no evidence suggesting that exposure to this can cause cancer. So in 2023, we published our 2-year evaluation. This is a summary of the 740 pages of the monograph. So if you're having difficulty reading, I highly recommend you download the monograph. It'll help you with any sleep challenges you may be having. But the monograph really, I think, brings the point, the infographic brings the point home that the overall evaluation reclassified the act of firefighting. So entering a space where you're going to be doing firefighting as a group 1 carcinogen, specific for mesothelioma and bladder cancer. And with increasing evidence that there are other cancers within the fire service worldwide, right? So this literature is around the world saying colon cancer, prostate, testicular, melanoma, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma were elevated in the fire service, right? And then we also saw very strong mechanistic evidence around the exposures that firefighters encounter in there, including changes with genotoxicity, epigenetic alterations, so the on and off switches of our DNA that may be changed due to the environmental exposure we're in, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and others. The monograph also highlighted the importance of looking at different subgroups of the firefighter workforce, right? I'll show you in just a minute that not all firefighters are created equal and have different roles. These were the cancers that were noted as elevated within the fire service. So I just summarized Nate DeBono's manuscript that was derived from the monograph. And you can see this meta-analysis of various cohort studies shows that mesothelioma, bladder, prostate, testicular, colon, skin, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and thyroid cancer were elevated. I have kidney cancer in gray because there's also high suggestions, especially when the subgroup fire investigators, that kidney cancer may be elevated, but there's 2 small studies available in order to inform those estimates. So what does the firefighter workforce look like? I practice occupational health and safety. So I think about what is my community? Who am I focused in on, right? So the National Fire Protection Association estimates that there's around 1.1 million firefighters. So those are the community that I'm trying to work with and address. So of those 1.1 million, around 35% are the ones that you and I think about, like our structural firefighters, right? That we're here in Houston, so our Houston firefighters, right? But it turns out that 65% of that 1.1 million are volunteer firefighters, right? That are working in rural areas, also delivering, rescue, fire rescue, and emergency rescue. And so the literature is actually very different around, the different studies that happen within the fire service. And so if you start breaking out, who are the members of the fire service, and this is certainly not a complete graphic, but you can see that there's many different types. There's paid structural firefighting, there's volunteer structural firefighting, there's firefighters that work just at airports and have different exposures at the airport, right? Because the federal mandate to have firefighters there, and they have jet fuel and other types of exposures. We have military, urban search and rescue. Here down in South Florida, we had the Surfside building collapse and had urban search and rescue immediately respond through their task force. Are their exposures different or unique than what they would see during regular structural firefighting? We have wildland. We have wildland-urban interface, right? When housing structures abut close to fire. We have the professors of firefighters are the fire trainers, right? And they tend to repeat training exercises over and over in a day. So are they doused with, extra components of environmental pollutants through their training experiences? We have fire investigators. These are the folks that do root cause analysis when they try to figure out what caused that fire to originate. Sometimes fire investigators don't wear PPE, right? So how can we use science to inform what is the best types of protection to use? And as you can see, there's many different types of firefighters, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for us to help and support the fire service in the United States by doing studies that are appropriate for each of their subgroups. So when we design projects in the National Firefighter Cancer Initiative, we think about the cancer control paradigm, right? So are the projects that we're designing informing prevention? Can I stop cancer from happening, right? And stopping is a hard word, right? We really want to say, can we reduce as much exposure and risk to the development of cancer? Do these projects support early detection? I'll show you in a moment how we use our mobile van clinic to be able to inform clinical practice. Like, should we be doing ultrasound on the thyroid for firefighters? Projects around diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship. So what happens when a firefighter does get cancer, right? How do we help them navigate and rehabilitate and go right back to work, right? There's questions about what are the best ways of doing that. And we want to be able to use science to inform that process and that decision making. So we've organized the National Firefighter Cancer Initiative around these 6 pillars. These 6 pillars allow us to concentrate on the different education, research, and service activities we do across all of our work. So the first one is the cancer, and I'll speak a little bit about each of these. The first one is the epidemiology and cancer registry. You have to know your numbers, right? What types of cancers are firefighters getting? What staging are they in? How many of them are getting it? Because there's no other way to know if you develop an intervention whether you're effectuating any change around that prevalence, right? We also want to know what impact the work overall is having on cancer incidence and mortality. The second program revolves around the environmental sampling program. This is our industrial hygiene program, where we're characterizing what are the aspects of the work environment, the training environment that ultimately impact this cancer risk. We have a dedicated cancer screening and education and survivorship program that Dr. Sali leads. This is where we evaluate what are the most effective ways of doing cancer screening with firefighters. Can we augment or enhance the cancer screening that's done from a civilian person to a firefighter based on what we know about cancer risk in the fire service? We also have the survivorship program, right, about how we rehabilitate and bring firefighters back into the fire service. The fourth program is the one that I run, which is our Occupational Environmental Carcinogen Biomonitoring Program. This is where we collect biological samples and try to understand what happens to the human body when you're exposed to certain of the carcinogens that we see within the environment. The fifth pillar is our firefighter prevention and cancer, our firefighter prevention and wellness clinic. This began as a traditional brick and mortar clinic, and then thanks to the Sala Foundation, was able to convert it into a mobile clinic where we take a jitney, a van, over to the fire station and do our annual physical exams with the firefighters while they're on work and shift. And the last one is our leadership pillar, which aside from doing our education and annual symposium, we also have the Torches Fellowship Program. So this year we launched a unique program for firefighters to be fellows within FCI and nominate and lead a research project within their fire department utilizing the resources of the FCI. So I'll show those projects to you. Let me begin. I'm going to do sort of, this is going to be like a tapas. I'm a big foodie. So I'm going to give you sort of an overview of the different projects across the different pillars. Unfortunately, not a lot of depth because of the time, but I would welcome questions on any of these activities that we're doing. So in the cancer epidemiology pillar of FCI, we have a couple of different cohorts that we do. The first is the annual cancer survey cohort. So this is a national cohort that does a very basic cancer screening, cancer behavior survey for firefighters. We ask it for once a year for firefighters to complete this survey. And then for fire departments that are interested, can also provide biological samples as urine, blood, and saliva, so that other researchers can utilize those biological samples to inform their science. The second cohort is a population-based cohort that is representative of fire departments in the state of Florida. So a couple of years after we started the annual cancer survey, we were really interested in having a cohort that reflects the workforce and the fire departments of the state of Florida uniquely, and developed the fire cohort. So it's the same as the annual cancer survey, only the sampling frame of how you pick those fire departments is different in fire. After we started the annual cancer survey, we got a lot of questions from the retirees. They're like, hey, you're working with the incumbents, but we're the ones getting cancer. We want to participate in research. And so we took that to heart and created the aerial cohort, which is our retired firefighters. And we follow them in the drop zone, so before they're about to retire, and then throughout their retirement to understand what their cancer experience is like. My colleague, Dr. Sally, she started a dedicated women's firefighter cohort about 4 years ago, where we're studying a couple of different exposures that are, happen within women firefighters and health outcomes, particularly around reproduction. We have a cohort that we closed, which is called the draft cohort. We were studying respiratory health within firefighters and doing very precise measurements of respiratory health in that firefighter cohort. We started the SAFE cohort, which continues today. This is our urban search and rescue firefighters that we follow over time as they respond to different disaster emergency response. We have our cancer registry. So this is a dedicated firefighter cancer registry. We match, and I would love to talk to our Houston firefighters and fire marshal, if there's one in the audience, about how we can use certification records for firefighters to link that to the cancer registry experience, right? So that we can get really good estimates and numbers around the types of cancers that Texas firefighters are experiencing. We've done that model in Florida successfully, and it has shown us what are the types of cancers that they're experiencing. And then most recently, thanks to FEMA, we are launching the Fire Investigator cohort, which is dedicated national cohort now for our fire investigators. So what are the things that we're learning through these registries? So one is the registry is so powerful because now you have population-based statistics to be able to actually say, well, these are the firefighters that were trained in the state, and these are the cancer outcomes that we do see from them. So one of the recent studies that was done by our statistician was looking at lung cancer survival among Florida male firefighters. This is, again, using the Florida-based registry, and some positive news, which is that lung cancer survival is significantly higher among firefighters compared to non-firefighters, right? Which kind of makes sense because they're on SCBA, and so usually during the most imminent times that they're exposed, lung cancers there. You get a different picture if we're comparing firefighters from the World Trade Center, but from structural firefighters not involved, we see that. We're also able to look at other elements from the cohort data around cancer risk, right? So it's not just the environment and the carcinogens you're exposed to in the environment, but also health risk behaviors, right, that we know contribute to cancer. So drinking is one of them, no surprise that, what are our firefighters consuming in terms of adult libations, if you will, that are there. So we're able to take the cohort data and run some estimates to see what we did. So this is 4,002 firefighters from the annual cancer survey, and we noticed the take-home message being overweight and obese is selectively associated with binge drinking. And we see high levels of binge drinking in the fire service compared to the general population. So it's very interesting to be able to use the cohort data there. And then among our retired firefighters, we've been studying the impact of sleep, right? So we know that there's shift work within firefighting, and we were looking specifically here at the relationship between post-traumatic stress disorder seen in firefighters and sleep latency. Sleep latency is the amount of time it takes you to fall asleep from when your head hits the pillow to your eyes actually shut down. And what we see is that retired firefighters with a PTSD experience have a higher risk to report sleep latency issues compared to those without any PTSD risk. So one of the interesting parts about this work, and I'm most inspired by, is the ability to inform policy, both little p and big P. So what do I mean by that? So little p is the small policy that happens in the fire department or in the fire station, right? Do we have any policies around decontamination procedures when we come back from a fire? But big P is being able to change legislative thinking and support for, say, a cancer diagnosis. So in Florida, thanks to the cancer registry, we were able to enact through the legislative bodies cancer presumption laws for firefighters. In fact, our firefighters did so well that they got 21 cancers, even though they're not, flagged as high risk, listed on workers' compensation. So it's presumed that if you work as a firefighter in the state of Florida and you have a certain limit of time that you've been working in that role for any of these cancers, that it came about because of your work as a firefighter. So this is to really show the importance of using cancer epidemiology and occupational epidemiology to inform policy and decision making. Another area of our pillar in epidemiology is recording the exposures and symptoms that the firefighters feel when they come out of a fire incident response. This happened very early on in the FCI. We took it to heart and went over to the School of Communication and said, okay, industrial engineer, we need your help to design an app that can allow firefighters to record their exposures and the symptoms they feel after they've been into a fire. So it took 2 years, a lot of formative work with many different firefighters, structural firefighters initially, to design a personal exposure record app. This is available on the web and then on both Google and the Apple stores, free for firefighters to download. And they have a tool now where they can record their incidents and what they experienced, what symptoms they feel, and then can be shared. And it's their personal record of what they have. So if they move to another fire department, they still have that with them. And we work with fire departments to customize the app for them based on like what their nomenclature is for how they record their issues. Okay, second pillar. You guys still with me? All right, so our second pillar is our environmental sampling program. So this is how we do exposure assessment. We want to be able to go into the workplace and training exercises and other events where we can learn a little bit about what they're exposed to. So this is led by our biochemistry department at the medical school, who have been instrumental in helping us develop a lot of different assessments for this. Unfortunately, we don't have industrial hygiene program or very few industrial hygienists, mostly focusing on mold. You can imagine we're South Florida, very humid environment. So their attention is not very much in the fire space, but more in mold remediation. And our biochemistry team has been really helpful to design a lot of these tools and techniques, which I'm about to show you. So one of the things we did early on, we learned from Dr. Kim Anderson at Oregon that you can use silicone as a polymer to characterize what a person has been exposed to. So if you look at silicone under a scanning electron microscope, it's really porous. And so it has a lot of divots and things for particles that are bound and unbound to things to get stuck in the wristband, and use it as a proxy measure for exposure, right? So it's hard to put on like the traditional methods of industrial hygiene on a firefighter because they're running and they're going fast. But the wristband really gives us a great way of getting a view of what they're exposed to. And so we've been over time deploying wristbands in many different types of settings during a regular 24-hour shift, during training exercises to characterize the different components of what they're exposed to in those environments and generate a heat map. So you can see a small heat map there at the bottom, and it's been an awesome tool to get conversations going about how to control, cancer in the workplace, because you give back the firefighter their heat map and they can see what they were exposed to compared to what their colleagues were in that same 24-hour or in that same type of event. Next to it, you can see we've been designing a rover, 3D printed a rover with different sensors for VOC detection that we run through different fire scenarios in order to be able to get ambient collection of things in more precise areas by running the rover through. We've also been doing different assessments of firefighting foams. Firefighters have taken interest in AFFF, aqueous film fighting foams, because they're known to have perfluoroalkylated substances, and wanted to know what those exposures are. So this is one of the studies we did with biochemists, take human kidney cells and expose them to different types and concentrations of foam to see what the response at the cellular level to these human kidney cells were to those foams. And one of the things we learned is that the higher the concentration of certain types of these foams, that there was greater cytotoxic effect and death of those cells from them. And then most recently, the biochem team has been working a lot on VOC measurements in our female firefighters. Okay, cancer screening, education, and survivorship. So here's where, from a population level perspective and from a clinic perspective, we've been trying to enhance our projects around cancer screening in the fire service. So my colleagues have developed these, what we call screening passports. So there's a male firefighter and a female firefighter passport, sort of like a checklist of what to have a conversation with your primary care about what do I need to be screened for and looked at when I go see a firefighter. And these are freely available, and I'm happy to share them if anybody needs them. These were put together by a consensus group of experts that sort of discuss what each of the types of screenings are. We also include, as you can see, reproductive health, mental health, occupational health, infectious disease, and general health. And it's a great discussion point with the firefighters on what are the types of screenings that have to be done. We've also created a toolbox. So we have both a digital toolbox and an in-person toolbox This toolbox is designed to throw it in the truck and have a conversation at the fire kitchen table around what can we do for cancer screening. It has all the small discussion notes and tasks about how we can improve that type of cancer screening. And then last year we made it digital, so it's available for firefighters that are there. These are access to the digital platforms for the cancer screening element. So you can see the toolkit includes an overview of the FCI. So firefighters that are interested in doing research with us and collaborating on educational research can learn more about what are the active research projects, what are the educational curriculum and materials that could be used. We look at both healthcare providers, right? What do we have to educate healthcare providers on to know about a firefighter? They don't know. When I went to medical school, I certainly was never taught about, oh, these are the special things you should think about that a firefighter encounters and perhaps should screen. So there's educational materials for healthcare providers and for the fire service to talk to their members about it, how to navigate a cancer diagnosis, and certainly a lot of resources, videos and whatnot for them to take a look at. So this is the Firefighter Cancer Prevention curriculum that's designed for healthcare providers. We talk in there about the comprehensive annual exam that happens with them, what are different modalities and inclusionary criteria for early cancer screening, and then what could be done for prevention. This is our nurse practitioner, Dr. Amy Green, with one of our firefighters in the mobile van. We've also been developing a lot of research on the survivorship of firefighters, right? So what happens when a firefighter gets that diagnosis of cancer? Who do they talk to? Who do they turn to, right? It could be a very difficult conversation. Maybe they don't want to disclose it to their colleagues in the fire station, right? Because they want to be able to continue work while they're still trying to figure out what's happening. How do they talk to their family members, right? Is that different of how it happens from a civilian person? And so we've been taking the time to do both a qualitative study and then an intervention study that we know is effective in prostate cancer, and are currently using the focus groups right now, evaluating the impact of that digital tool on survivorship for our firefighters. Okay, biomonitoring program. So how do we learn about those exposures in there? So one of them, my personal favorite right now, is PFAS, perfluoroalkylated substances. They're called forever chemicals. There's a lot of PFAS, like it's estimated that around 15,000 of them are in existence. They are man-made, right? So they should not be existing in this world, but we created them. And it was actually, they have some useful properties, right? They're good at repelling water and oil, but we are learning as our science evolves that this chemical also has health effects, and unfortunately some negative health effects. What makes them interesting is their property. They last for a long time. These chemicals are a combination of carbon and fluorine bonds, which are very difficult to break naturally. And so they persist both in the environment and in the human body for a long time. So some about the legacy, the old school PFAS that you see here can last 3.5 years, 4.8 years, 8.5 years. So from us, from an occupational health perspective, it's very difficult because if you do see PFAS today in someone's blood, they could have been exposed to it a long time ago, right? And originating the source is difficult. We do strongly believe that in the fire service, there are potentially 2 point sources run, right? So one is this AFFF foam, which thankfully there's a lot of discussion about elimination of these foams from fire departments in different places. And the other very hot topic right now is within the firefighter gear. So the actual same gear that protects them has 3 linings. One of the inner linings is the moisture barrier lining, and that middle textile is PFAS, includes PFAS. And it's mostly done because of some testing, and it makes it difficult to study. So I wanted to share this because this is hot off the press, even though this is 2024. In science, everything is slow, right? So data from 2022 is hot off the press, at least for us. But this one is a new monograph. So I showed you earlier about the monographs that we have. And this one is 135 from IARC. And this was evaluating PFAS. Specifically, they were looking at PFOA and PFAS. So PFOA, as of 2024, is now known to be a group 1 carcinogen. And PFOS was elevated to be a group 2B, right? So if you're a firefighter, say you're sitting here in this audience, you're like, man, I'm exposed to a lot of environmental pollutants in my work, right? But this is why we want to work with our firefighters to be able to decrease these individual exposures. So what have we done in Florida? So this is now a couple of years old. We took blood samples from 2 large fire departments in the state, one in North Florida, one in the South, and just through phlebotomy took a blood sample and looked at a couple of the different PFAS. So what you see here, this color tiles, is different PFAS that we tested for in the blood. And then based on what type of primary role do they have in the fire department? Do they work at the airport? Are they an investigator? Are they a structural incumbent firefighter, a probie rookie, and a retired firefighter? And what this tells us is that there's a lot of variation in the type of PFAS, and that the role that you play may actually expose you more or less to the different types of PFAS that we see. This was very interesting because most recently I was on the NAS Academy's committee to look at what clinical guidance we develop. So the Department of Defense in 2019 mandated that military folks had to do PFAS testing. And so healthcare providers were receiving back results for PFAS in their blood. And they're like, what do we tell the patients? We have no guidance. And so NAS stepped up and said, okay, let's see what we have, and did an evaluation, and then was able to classify PFAS into these 3 buckets. So we basically now have some clinical guidance to help inform and guide clinicians on what to do. So if you're curious, if you do a blood sample today and you get back your PFAS, and again, this is only looking at 11 PFAS of the 15,000, because these are the only 11 that we have known health effects for, and we're able to summarize. So if you're less than 2, nothing to worry about there. If you're between 2 and 20, there's specific guidelines around testing for different things. So for example, dyslipidemia. So a person could have out of whack cholesterol and lipids based on their PFAS levels, if it's higher or lower. And then other things. And then if you're above 20, there's similar testing that happens, but it's also including evaluation for thyroid function, kidney cancer, and signs of ulcerative colitis, inflammation in the colon that we've seen related to PFAS exposure. The other cool things we get to study in the biomonitoring program are heavy metals. And I'll share with you one of the really fun things about occupational health is, yeah, we have our legacy hazards that we always work with, but the profession is always evolving and new, right? And so firefighters are now dealing with electric vehicle fires and the challenges with suppression of electric vehicle fires. Does that differentially expose them to heavy metals from those exposures? And that's one of the things that we're trying to do now is biomonitor that. One of the things that I use is toenails, which are awesome. We have graduate students who collect them, not me. But when we collect them, we can test them on ICP-MS to characterize the type and concentrations of the metals that we see. So we can generate a heat map that shows us what we see there. So some of these look really scary because you're like, wow, the really dark reds of like calcium, right? But you need calcium in your nails. That's important and that's good. That means that they're there. But there's other ones that are outlier metals that I want to know where they came from and what we can do to mitigate them. And so these are the tools that we sort of like deploy. Okay, I want to show you a very quick video of a recent project that we just launched in July. So I mentioned to you, there's always new and evolving hazards that happen in the fire service. And so our performance period at our grant usually starts July 1st, and the firefighters were like, we need you to study electric vehicle fires. I'm like, okay, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Okay, how do we get this going? So they procured a Nissan Leaf car. This is what you're looking at is an aerial view at the State Fire College in Florida. So this is in Ocala, Florida, about 45 minutes out of Orlando, where there's a school for firefighting. And we used one of them to test this out. So I'll show you a quick, this is what we did as a PSA video from the firefighters.
Stand by for drill initiation.
What you are seeing is the electric vehicle.
Command, go for E.
On fire. This experiment, in collaboration with the Florida Division of State Fire Marshals, is an attempt to understand a dangerous phenomenon surrounding lithium-ion batteries.
There's over 1 billion batteries a year put into the general population. It takes every aspect of our lives, from our smartwatch, our cell phones, tablets, appliances in your kitchen.
Unlike regular fires, they burn extremely intense, with very little warning, and are incredibly difficult to put out.
The general public needs to know what they have, what they already have in their household, and potentially what they're buying. I don't mean that all these batteries are unsafe. What I mean by that is there is a potential that if there is a problem, or if you're misusing your batteries, or you have an aging battery, or you're using the wrong chargers, that you're going to have a problem. And the problem is going to be a lot bigger than what you think it may be, and it could be a deadly problem.
To understand these risks, the Firefighter Cancer Initiative at the University of Miami and their collaborators conducted tests on both individual battery cells on a full electric vehicle. For this research demonstration, lithium-ion batteries in this vehicle are of the pouch type and modular in design and consist of many smaller pouches.
Lithium-ion batteries are a challenge in the United States, and certainly for us in the fire service, it's a fairly new type of energy that the fire service is starting to see. We're seeing it in everything from a cell phone to micromobility devices, but also EV vehicles.
We're going to break a lithium-ion battery down to a one-cell battery, commonly known as the 18650 battery. It's the most common battery. There's about 8,000 or more of these in a EV in the battery coils.
The cell is placed on a hot plate, exploding with significant force within seconds. Remnants found 30 feet away. Now imagine the potential danger of thousands of these cells in larger devices or vehicles. As the electric vehicle catches fire, we see high-pressure gas expanding from the cells. And just as we saw earlier, batteries shooting out in all directions. Complicating the situation, these fires burn intense. The amount of water to fight them shows it.
Basically 500 to 750 gallons of water for a normal family-sized car. When you're starting to see a lot of the stats with a typical EV fire, that there was 30,000 gallons used, there was 40, there was 20. It's important to realize that really the water, if it's not reaching the cells and cooling it down, you're not really putting the fire out.
Florida's division of the State Fire Marshal's Office is collaborating with Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Miami. The goal is to understand the risk to first responders.
Electric vehicle fires actually have metals, and metals are easily connected to cancer development. And so we really want to look at how and what types of metals these firefighters come across in that fire, and what we could do to ultimately protect them and the community where they're turning off these fires.
This is a huge wake-up call for us. The quicker that we can identify what we need to handle these types of fires, the quicker we're going to keep our community safe, the quicker we're going to make our firefighters safe.
Right now, though, there are steps you can take to protect yourself and...
So I'm going to stop the video because the rest is a PSA for the community on how to, be aware of the batteries that are there. But isn't occupational health really exciting, right? There's always something new and different for us to examine and look at and ultimately protect the workers that we want to. This study was really challenging for me. It's a field-based study, even though it's controlled, because we, planned to actually set this car on fire. The level of engagement that we needed to do with the firefighters and the timing had to be just right in order to make sure that we're collecting the biological samples and environmental samples as we needed. So you can see the Nissan Leaf up at the top, and then we created cells on the floor using painter's tape to know where we're going to be sampling from for the different soil and water samples throughout time. So this experiment was actually done over 4 days. Each box represents one of the days. So on Wednesday, July 24th at 11 a.m., we had all the firefighters meet us in the classroom there in the fire college, where we collected all the biological samples from them, including blood, urine, saliva, exhaled breath. We did pulmonary function tests, oscilloscopy, and then asked them for a toenail sample. So we could see what their unadulterated toenails look like with heavy metals before this EV fire, including knowing their history on prior EV and fire exposure. Then the morning of the fire on Thursday at 7 a.m., we met them again in the classroom and collected these biological samples, walked them over to the fire where they initiated propagation and their fire suppression activities. Then around 12 p.m., some of these measures were collected directly on scene as soon as they came off SCBA, and others were collected back in the classroom. On the next day after the fire, on Friday, July 26th, we repeated the same measures again for blood, urine, saliva, and breath. And you can see this was a pretty challenging experience to collect it. The firefighters were wearing brand new gear that was furnished by Tenny. We used the same roll that was used to manufacture the turnout gear to place it strategically on each of these traffic cones. So you'll see we set up traffic cones in a Cartesian plane on the floor to be able to measure north, south, east, and west directions of environmental contaminant as they came across through there. So here's their exhale breath, which is pretty interesting. So we asked the firefighters to breathe into a heavy metal tube that's been placed on dry ice to cool it down. and we have them breathe into this tube for about 5 minutes so that we get their exhale breath. And then you can take the exhale breath, bring it back to the lab, and then run ICP-EMS on it to look at the metals and types that were there. So this heat map is showing you the type and concentration of metals that we saw on the breath across each of the time points. So T1 is Wednesday, T2 is Thursday morning, T3 is Thursday afternoon, T4 is Friday, and then a control group of people that are not firefighters, so we could see their exhale breath. And so the metals that were of highest concentration in the breath, you'll notice what's not there. Lithium-ion battery, right? Oh, I'm going to see lots of lithium, but actually it was present in low abundance in their exhale breath that happened on there. But we do see different variations of the other types of metals, which we're now trying to piecemeal with the environmental samples to see what we see that's there, right? And the very normal metals, right? Calcium. So we have calcium in skeletal muscle and would expect to see it in breath. That's measured there, but why are we seeing chromium, nickel, and barium? That's there. This biomonitoring work has also been done internationally. So we've had the opportunity to work with firefighters from the Dominican Republic, which are a completely different resource state than firefighters here in the US. So I apologize that this is in Spanish, but this is one of our proudest projects because we were talking about earlier with $10,000, we were able to do 3 research projects with them and inform a lot of the research work that was doing there. So we started off with the Dominican firefighters doing qualitative data to understand them. What is their culture and practice around health and safety, particularly for carcinogen mitigation? And then ultimately ended up doing the wristband study with them also to show them like what their exposures are when they go to a fire and inform their practices for decontamination. So it's been a lot of a very rewarding experiment because otherwise they would have never known that they are exposed to these things. In these low resource settings, these firefighters American firefighters supplies. So after the life of the turnout gear, it's been 10 years, they're donated and they're so appreciative, down in the DR, they actually like sleep with their gear. One gentleman had folded up his turncoat and was using it as a pillow. And I'm having an MI because I'm like, you should not be, that is not a pillow. But he figured that it was comfortable and it was ready because he could put it on right away. And then after he got his heat map, he realized, like what's happening there, and bring it home to have the conversation. That's why industrial hygiene is really important because you have to show what's happening. Okay, 5th to last pillar, the firefighter prevention and wellness clinic. So when we started this clinic, it was a traditional brick and mortar at the cancer center and 3 of our satellite facilities. And we basically contract and work with the local municipality to set up the annual physical exams for the firefighters that are there. Thanks to the Sala family, we were able to initially acquire 1 van, and then with a second donation from the Sala family, we're able to acquire a 2nd van that we now bring the clinic out to the firefighters. So we lower the barrier of having to schedule time off, right? They can actually do this during shift and get their annual physical exam. We follow NFPA guidelines, just as would be done for any occupational medical examination, but enhance it with our knowledge on cancer screening for these firefighters. The fire department gets to choose which ones of them do they want to participate and do. And we leverage it to be able to also do science and evaluate how other modalities can impact it. One of the biggest and most important programs that we do is having a dedicated firefighter nurse navigator program. So I don't know if we have any occupational health nurses in the room, but this is a really great way to enhance the connectivity between the fire department and our public health practice. Why? So we have a national number, 305-243-FIRE, and any firefighter in the United States can call Tony, Antonia Levitt, who's our nurse practitioner, and she will navigate them to the closest NCI-designated cancer center with our connections to make sure that that firefighter can have a direct contact with a cancer center knowledgeable about what it is. And then we also, provide whatever resources through the Firefighter Cancer Support Network and other ancillary groups to make that connection. But a nurse navigation program is key because then Tony can follow up with that firefighter and see what happened to them and if they're getting the right attention and care that they need. So this is not just for Florida firefighters, this is for anyone in the US. So as of 23 and 24, we've deployed our 2nd mobile vehicle. We've completed physical exams for 3 departments. I was telling my colleagues today during lunch that we've started very small. We worked with small to medium-sized departments. I think the largest one that we've done is 300 members, right? We have not been able to tackle our county department because they have 3,000 members. right? And they see themselves across 2 years. They split themselves because they're so large, right? But as we scale and grow, we'll hopefully be able to start addressing more and more of those issues. Okay, leadership. So the leadership pillar for FCI is really cool. It's where we get to, do an environmental scan of what's happening at our state and in the nation, and say, okay, how can we, scale and use the resources and knowledge that we have to support other firefighters. So we host since 2019, thank you to NIOSH, the International Firefighter Cancer Symposium. So this is where we bring in industry, government, firefighters, union, and labor. And industry is really important because we have to tell them how to redesign their trucks and their cabs and certain turnout gear so that they're aware of what the science is saying for their adaptation. We host monthly seminar series. So we host scientists that are doing really great work in firefighters through monthly seminar series. Our social media posts, our Torches Fellowship. And I want to tell you about the Torches Fellow program because I'm really proud of this one, right? This is the notion and the idea that we would bring in firefighters into FCI. They become fellows, learn ethics, responsible conduct of research. It's kind of like an MPH really fast, right? Where they get to learn about public health, and then they choose a scientist of FCI that they want to work with, and then use the resources that are inside FCI to develop a project on their own. So we have 2 fellows. You're going to say there's not a Florida one. Yes, it's true, but we are a national resource, but our Florida firefighter had some personal issues that limited him from participating. So we have 2 really amazing fellows in this inaugural year. Laura Foster, who's a volunteer firefighter in Huntington, West Virginia, and then Chief Brian O'Neill in San Antonio Fire Department in Texas. And they're each developing their own project. Laura is using photo voice as a qualitative approach, a qualitative method to document what are the health and safety concerns of the volunteer firefighters in their stations. So she asks them with their cell phone to take a bunch of pictures, and then she sits with them and interviews them and says, why did you choose this picture as a concern for occupational health and safety? So we're really excited to hear her results. She'll be presenting them in February. And then Chief Dr. O'Neill, he's an overachiever. He is working on a project on survivorship. So for San Antonio, it's really important to make sure that for him and his fire department, that when those firefighters get diagnosed with cancer, that they're navigating the right pathways there with the Mace Cancer Center. And he's doing some evaluations on survivorship there. And it's really exciting. They've been with us now for 10 months. So they'll be presenting their research at the symposium. And so I invite you, if you want to continue this conversation about learning about cancer in the fire service, to meet with us at the symposium. It's free registration. It always takes place in February on the 3rd week, on the 20th and the 21st. And it's a great way to meet other firefighters, industry partners, and scientists from around the world that come and present the latest science that's happening there. So you can visit our dedicated study website, sylvester.org/firefighters, to learn more about FCI. I know that was really fast and a whirlwind of I don't know how else to compress everything that we do in a very short amount of time. I'm thankful again to my hosts, for such a wonderful visit. I'm hoping that this sparks some conversation and being able to collaborate and do some research. As you can see, there's a lot of work to do in the fire service to protect them as they, in turn protect us. And I'm happy to take any questions if our time permits. Yeah.
Thank you. That was fabulous. I was sorry to hear it end. Yeah, we have time for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone. All right.
Hi, I'm Kim Phillips. I'm with the Houston Fire Department, District Chief. I'm the head babysitter on the A shift. Okay. We've had several women in our department have cancer. Usually the typical female cancers, breast. We've had some ovarian cancers and some cervical cancers. I was a stage 4 survivor myself. So our problem is you mentioned the statistic of 7% of women are career firefighters. So is there any movement in the studies to bring women further into the fold of our cancers being relevant? I know in Texas, we only have 5 or 7, 11 presumptives. All of them are dude cancers and none of them are women.
Mhm.
So as your studies moving that legislation forward? Have you found anything interesting? Anywhere we can get that information? You don't have to talk about women right now. Time's short. Anything?
No, excellent question. And this is, I think, where collaborating together could be really important. Remember, I talked about the dedicated Firefighter Cancer Registry, right? So I want to distinguish a couple of different things here. So one is, in 2018, the president signed the National Firefighter Registry, which is a congressionally mandated registry, which is now home at the CDC in NIOSH. And their job is to enroll 100 firefighters with and without cancer that they can follow long-term to understand what happens with cancer diagnosis. There's a strong emphasis on women and subgroup firefighters to be represented in there. So if the fire department is not aware of the NFR, the National Firefighter Registry, that's definitely a tool and a resource to have a conversation on. And I'm happy to connect you with the NIOSH folks, or happy to present to you on the registry, whatever would help to have the conversation around there. The other thing that I think is really important and would love to see, and I'm talking to the epidemiologists in the room, is that having a dedicated Texas firefighter registry is key, right? The brief recipe of how to do that is, it's mandated that we have to record cancer. It's a CDC public health thing. So anybody that gets cancer is registered in a cancer registry. So Texas has one. I just learned moments ago. It's, I think, in Austin, in the Texas Health Services. Forgive me, I don't know the agency, but they have it, right? So then we need to get them to have a conversation with our state fire marshal or whoever holds the certification records for firefighters in the state of Texas, so that we can connect the certification records of who has been a firefighter, Cert 1, Cert 2, whatever the certifications are, to the cancer registry. That linkage allows you to create an estimate of which Texas firefighters are getting cancer, what type and what stage. That is a very powerful tool for policy, because when you have a population-based registry of just Texas firefighters and you can estimate them, I can see if the rates of cancer in the fire service in Texas are different from the general population. And that's a massive tool to be able to have conversations around, like, yes, we are seeing that Texas firefighters have a higher risk for X, Y, and Z. Other states have done this, right? So Florida is obviously one example. California has done this. Rebecca Sy did this with the California Registry. Steve Moffett has done it with Indiana. And there's others opportunity. But I think if the firefighters can pair up with the School of Public Health here and the epidemiologists and the industrial hygienists, you can make that, magic happen in getting those statistics so then you can look at them. So now let me back into the women firefighters. Lots of different projects happening that are really cool around the US on women firefighters. So we obviously have our women cohort. FEMA also has a women cohort that's run through my colleague, Dr. Jeff Burgess at the University of Arizona, has also a women's cohort. Okay, excellent. So that's a great way. Our colleagues out in San Francisco have the Women's Biomonitoring Group. They're doing lots of studies, for example, like on lactation. So they actually collect breast milk from women firefighters when they're postpartum, and are evaluating, like, are PAHs present in there so that it can inform policy, like when should we advise for those types of changes. I really think, I've always believed you practice public health locally, right? So the question is, what does the local fire department need in order to make the changes that you want to see, right? And is that a cancer registry? Like, do you need those numbers to make that difference? Is it a study to characterize the PAHs that are in your fire station so you can show that this is the carcinogens that we're exposed to? You guys should lead and nominate those projects and use the clinical and science tools of the School of Public Health to make those studies happen. Yeah. Useless information, lots of useless information. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I think early on one of your slides, it said that IARC had highlighted bladder cancer. Is there a particular hazard, chemical or lifestyle hazard seems to be driving that?
Not so much. So there are some studies that look at certain toxicants as responsible for it, but it's very hard to characterize. We're having this discussion at lunch. When a firefighter enters a hazardous environment, it's the total exposome, right? It's the chair that's burning, it's the plant that's in the home that's also burning, the mattress, and all these things. It's hard to ascribe a particular toxicant to it. There are studies that look at in general, not just in firefighting, about what leads, acrolein exposure to like bladder cancer, but there's nothing that I can definitely point you to. I have some of my industrial hygiene colleagues here who may be more, and toxicologists that are maybe notable in there, but from my vantage point, it's a plume of heterogenic things that they're exposed to. It's hard to tease out because like even when we do our science projects, if I'm just looking at PAHs, that's most scientists use around the country because it's a proxy measure for carcinogen exposure. But there's so many other things in that plume, from heavy metals, PFAS, other semi-volatile organic compounds that we haven't, really characterized. This is the shy group. Yeah.
I have a question.
The guy above. Is that someone online?
Yes.
Yeah.
So my name is Jack. Let me turn on my camera for a second so we can.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So my name is Jack. I'm a PGY2 Occupational and Environmental Medicine resident at the UT Health in Houston. First of all, thank you for the insightful lecture. My question for you is the following: with the role of, with the growing role of artificial intelligence, have you implemented or considered like leveraging advanced machine learning techniques to analyze the complex, multimodal data set that's collected from firefighters? Specifically, working on developing, for example, a personalized risk assessment model that incorporate individual firefighter characteristics like age, gender, and genetics that will lead to a predictive model that will predict potential health outcomes based on like cumulative exposure profiles and biomarker data that's been collected?
Yeah, let me just say that's an excellent question. And first, thank you for being an OEM resident and a future OEM doc. We need more. We need more of them. So I'm really excited about that. I'll share with you what I can tell you what we've done with AI and machine learning. So we just did an abstract recently at the American College of Epi using machine learning to understand testosterone supplementation and inflammation in firefighters. So one of the things we see in clinic is that there's a lot of requests for testosterone supplementation and what its impact is on health in general. We took our clinic data, the one that you saw from the brick and mortar and from the mobile van, and then used AI and machine learning to try to do some prediction of where inflammation would be based on levels of testosterone supplementation. And it was just an application, so it wasn't anything fancy, but it gave us some really neat tools about thinking of how to use AI and machine learning in looking at our clinical data to answer that question, because our firefighters in Florida have been increasingly using T, testosterone supplementation. There are many, we were talking about this during lunch today, that one of the cool things to do from an exposure characterization point of view is a job exposure matrix, right? It gets very expensive to try to measure every single person's exposures when they go in there, but there are certain common things. So if we simplify everything, we only think about the training environment. When a firefighter goes and does fire suppression for a Class A fuel, right? You can go and characterize what is released from that Class A fuel. It's a pure thing, but it gives you an opportunity to create what we call a job exposure matrix, a GEM. And it says that when a firefighter, enters a certain environment for a certain period of time with a certain exposure, can you extrapolate out what a risk would be, right? And I think that's a space that's really prime for AI and machine learning, right? Where you can take a lot of data that has been collected and sort of try to extrapolate out what it's there. We haven't done that yet, because as you can see, we've been doing a couple of other different things, but I would certainly encourage the team here to think about how to leverage artificial intelligence and being able to do risk prediction and cancer risk for firefighters. Does that answer your question, or did I go too tangential?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I think there was another question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Matt Carr. I used to be in industrial hygiene for Shell. And I'm curious about the silica wristband, and if that's a NIOSH approved method or OSHA approved method, and if it and what it measures and how.
Yeah, I'm happy to share with you the details of it. It's not an approved method number 5233. This is something that I learned from Kim Anderson at Oregon State, who was using it in children to study pesticide exposure. And she was giving it to them when they would go to school, and they would put it on their wrist or their anklet, and then she could characterize different pesticides that they came around when they were at the elementary school. And then I thought about, could this be used in a firefighting environment? Because we couldn't use the traditional methods of, putting them on a vacuum when they're like doing fire response. So we've been adapting and publishing those papers showing how you can use the wristband for detection. When do they get congested? My colleagues at Duke University, Heather Stapleton, has been doing some really great work long-term on the wristbands with other different types of toxicants. So it's there, but it's not in a like EPA approved method. But it's really wonderful because it's cheap, inexpensive, and you get some really great insights, to what they come across.
Great. Sounds very innovative. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk. The section on the lithium ion batteries and your characterization of what's happening during those fires was interesting. And I was wondering if has there been similar characterizations of kind of new types of fires where there's an urban interface, and you have entire towns like Paradise, California, and is that changing the profile of what firefighters are being exposed to, or is that an area of research that needs to be done still?
It is an area of research ongoing, and a lot of research needs to be done in that space because we don't know. We were saying today during lunch, you saw a fire, you saw a fire. It is so heterogeneous of what's there, whether it is pure wildland interface. In Florida, in fact, tomorrow when I get back to Miami, I work and I'm leaving to Pensacola to go do a qualitative study with Florida forestry firefighters for 3 days. And people dump stuff in the wildland, right? Their garbage, especially in rural settings, they just put it away. And when that goes on fire, it's not just the brush and the vegetation that's there, it's also whatever else in there that's burning. And so it becomes incredibly difficult to, firefighters are constantly exposed to different and evolving hazards. That's why I try to emphasize the total exposome. Like, what are there ways to create risk and measurement models that encapsulate everything that a firefighter is exposed to? A scientist, we go piecemeal, right? So, okay, can we look at just the pHs right now? What do we see? How do they fluctuate? But when there are opportunities in research settings to capture everything that's there, do it. The science is still catching up. And it's one of the things I have the hardest time telling firefighters is like, we're slow, we're scientists. And we want to make sure that what we see, right? Because they're in a profession where they answer quickly and they have to, like, it's life or death. But science takes time. And I think encouraging scientists to look at the total exposome in a collaborative way that brings everybody to the table and says, how can we do these measurements using the biomonitoring to go and inform back the basic science is really key, right? And I think this is a great place to do it because you have a school of public health and a lot of really wonderful departments, amazing clinicians, industrial hygienists, epidemiologists that can really come together to start answering those questions about the exposure for the Houston Fire Department.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your great work. It's amazing, project, what you have done and what you are going on, what's ongoing right now. And my question is about the vehicles, what you are doing for the pilot study. Yeah. So it seems like you are doing the short-term exposure assessment using a different, many different like biological samples. So my understanding is the half-life of the exposure of the biological samples is all different. So using those, 4 days, sampling campaign, it's maybe some limitations. So how do you actually plan, and what is your, what was your actual original plan to see during this short time period of the exposure assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like the cumulative exposure over the long term, right? So I didn't get to go into depth into the cohorts, but the cohorts all have repeated measures inside of them, right? So we asked the firefighters to give repeated measures of biological samples over time in order to do that. So depending on the research question that we're asking from the cohort data, there are some samples that are repeated for long-term cumulative, right? So our annual cancer survey is now 10 years old. We started it back in we launched it December 22nd of 2015. Natasha and I were sitting at a workstation terminal in the clinical research building. We're like, we're going to launch this red cap. It's going to go live. And we launched, and it's been 10 years now since we did it. and it requires us to go back to the fire department and collect the biological samples from them. So at a minimum, the repeated measures are 1 year at a time. And depending on the research question, we do repeated measures. So like toenail clippings. I've been following the urban search and rescue firefighters now for 3 years since they did the Surfside building collapse. And every quarter I receive in the mail, lots of toenails. So, and it's very interesting to explain that to my department chair. While all these coin envelopes come back, but those repeated measures are there and we save them. So we have a biorepository of them and we can use them, you know, for different questions. So we don't have enough repeated measures for every single question, but it's starting somewhere. And that's why we need partnerships, because different institutions can work together to save them and utilize them long-term. And in terms of cumulative exposure, one more note that's really important since our firefighters are here is to get some biological samples when you start as a firefighter, before, you know, when you're in the academy. Because if we can save those as you mature in your tenure as a firefighter, later on, we can answer questions about what happened over time to them. But we need them from the beginning. It's hard to make any types of predictions or assessments if you're doing it at midlife, right? You're 40 years old and you want us to, we don't have from what happened when you were 20 or 21 years old. Yeah. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Dr. Alberto Caban-Martinez.
Thank you.
This was a fabulous way for us to wrap up our 2024 visiting scholars lecture. I know that there were 2 questions online, and Bernard, if you will send us your email address, we will follow up with Dr. Caban to get answers to those questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of that today. You'll just have to come back. As a small token of our appreciation for your visit, we have a memento.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, good.
So thank you. This concludes the lecture today. Thank you all for coming, and thank you especially for traveling on a holiday weekend to be here last night and today. And we look forward to a return visit and also to our future collaborations. For our Houston Fire Department friends, if you want to reach us, I've been in contact with Gabriel. Please feel free to email me and I can help put you in touch with whomever you want to be in touch with. Also on the back side of the small program that we had printed is a QR code for the Southwest Center. And from that website, you can also send us information. So please be in touch because we're looking forward to deepening our collaborations with you. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.